So, needless to say, yesterday's video created a ton of discussion. There were two main things, of course, everybody wanted to know about. And certainly my opening question stirred up a lot of discussion. And that is, does Thermal Club deserve a third race in IndyCar? And wow, over 1,000 comments and counting. That's insane. And in this video, I wanted to highlight some of them and discuss some of them and keep the discussion going. And you can keep the discussion going as well by going down in the comment section below. I guarantee you, there are people who are important in the industry reading those comments. So if you want your voice to be heard, I would suggest you go down there and type away. Give me your thoughts, give me your feelings, because I guarantee you they'll be read by somebody. And while you're down there, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I always forget to remind people to do that. I'm going to try to do a better job of reminding people to do that. But before we get into the discussion about Thermal itself and whether or not it should remain on the IndyCar calendar in 2026 and beyond, I want to clean up exactly what happened yesterday with the power outage that ultimately took Fox Sports off of the air for a significant portion of yesterday's race at the Thermal Club. And I've seen it reported a couple of different places. I believe both Racer Magazine and the Indy Star. I believe the Indy Star specifically quoted IndyCar President Doug Bowles, or attributed the quote to IndyCar President Doug Bowles. So I definitely believe that this information is to be believed. And that is the issue that caused the power outage, which caused us to lose the pictures for about, I think it was like 10 or 15 laps of the race, was that a circuit breaker allegedly overheated and went out. And that went out in the TV compound. Now, something that a lot of people are kind of misappropriating blame, or an entity that people are misappropriating blame to, is Fox themselves. Now, it is true that ultimately Fox, the buck is going to stop with Fox because Fox is the one broadcasting the race, right? But Fox employs the IndyCar-owned IMS Productions to actually create the broadcast, which then Fox produces and puts out onto their airwaves. So the problem was in the TV compound with one of the breaker boxes. For whatever reason, that breaker box went out. The broadcast, of course, went down, and all of the controversy got stirred up yesterday. I suppose we'll talk about it a bit on Unverified tomorrow at 8 p.m. I'm not sure if this was the best case scenario for a failure like this or the worst case scenario. I don't think there really is a best case scenario for a failure like this, but I suppose I would at least say it didn't happen at the Indianapolis 500. The problem has been identified and will hopefully be rectified before it really starts to count. But as I mentioned yesterday, in race 2 of this contract, when the contract is this important, it is I keep saying this and I feel bad for saying this, but it is what it is. I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm always going to do that. And in telling it like it is, the biggest story of the IndyCar offseason, for better or for worse, was that Fox Sports had picked up the TV contract. And when you lay an egg like that, when you make it such an important issue and Fox makes it such an important issue, and then this happens. Tough. Very, very tough. We'll see what the TV rating is for Thermal. I presume that will come out tomorrow. Again, that will be something we'll be able to discuss on Unverified. But something we can discuss right now is whether or not the Thermal Club should retain a spot on the IndyCar calendar. I, of course, asked all of you viewers whether or not you think that that is what should be taking place next year. Got a variety of different answers. Now, for me personally, I thought yesterday's race was pretty good. I would say it's above average for current day modern IndyCar on a road course. Now, is that a low bar to clear? Probably. But I cannot deny what I saw with Alex Palou and Christian Lundgaard battling for second. That looked like something right out of the Cleveland airport with the side-by-side back-and-forth racing. And then the fact that Alex Palou was able to chase down the dominant driver on the day, Pato O'Ward, pass him and drive away, I don't know. I thought it was pretty exciting. But what did the comments have to say? Let's go to some of them. And the first one comes from No Drink the Bleach. Great name. And we don't have to talk about F1 in Shanghai, But we should talk about his second point, which is thermal is an image problem for the sport. So says the Bleach Man. It makes it look like not only Penske cannot fill the extremely short schedule with real tracks, but they need to beg a club track to let commoners on the property. Regardless of the on-track action, this date is a blight on the calendar. Okay, so this is a very interesting point, and one I don't necessarily disagree with. And I think it's been the issue with Thermal Club, or at least the challenge that Thermal Club is going to have to overcome and has had to overcome since the moment that it was talked about. And that is that, number one, the schedule has always been a problem for IndyCar. There's been very rare occasions where the schedule has been like, oh yeah, it's perfect, it's fine, it's great. The races are evenly spread out. We've got a great spread of venues and track types and where those venues are placed. Like, very rarely has IndyCar ever got the schedule completely right. There have been times, and maybe I should make a video where I say these were the 5 best schedules in IndyCar history. But yes, when you struggle to stay at places like Texas or Pocono or Phoenix, or you can't keep the race downtown at Nashville, or what happened to Baltimore, New Orleans, you go through the list, and why hasn't IndyCar gone back to Michigan post-merger? I don't know. Well, we'll keep saying that until the cows come home, and maybe someday the cow actually will come home, and David will be sitting in the grandstands at Michigan. But until that day, we got Thermal Club. And at the very least, and we'll talk about it later in this video because there's some comments that specifically bring it up, Thermal Club wants IndyCar there, and they want to pay for IndyCar to be there. And that is something that we don't necessarily see a lot of these days. To your second point, yes, absolutely, Thermal has an optics issue. It's always had an optics issue, and it's one that they still have yet to solve, in my opinion. The perception that there always has to be... So I understand where people are coming from when they talk about commoners on the racetrack. And again, this all goes back to Thermal announcing that $2,000 ticket, 1.5, 2 years ago, right? It always feels like IndyCar is almost invading Thermal, and the fans are the last thing on the priority list. Now, whether that's true or not, I've spoken, I tried to do my best, my due diligence last year when I went to Thermal. And I spoke to members, I spoke to management, I tried to understand and try to tell the story of Thermal and why they wanted an IndyCar race from their perspective. I think there needs to be more done on that front. I'll say this too. I don't necessarily think that that's the attitude that the Thermal Club members have, or the Thermal Club management. I think that they are open and interested in welcoming of IndyCar and its fans to their racetrack. They wouldn't be putting on an event like this if they weren't. But I think there's a bit of misunderstanding about, there's a misunderstanding of why IndyCar fans feel the way that they do. And I think that disconnect is shown in the way that the Thermal Club has kind of like structured their event, reacted to some of the criticism. I think that's where the issue is. And until the messaging gets hammered out a little bit better, and, there's going to be some IndyCar fans you're never going to change the mind of, right? But I think there are some IndyCar fans that maybe you'd be able to change the mind of. But until that messaging really gets adjusted, you're going to get reactions like this, I would say. Comment number 2 comes from Alex. The race was good and natural. No cautions and meaningful passes for the win and podiums. I'll take that over many of the other types of tracks that we have. And that's what I said about, kind of the Cleveland comparison. Was it the entire race like it would be at like Cleveland, for example? No. But, I mean, I really can't deny how much I enjoyed the sequence of Alex Palou on the new Reds just tearing through the field. I thought that was exciting. And there was some decent battling throughout the mid-pack. Again, when you compare it to St. Pete, I thought this was a significantly better race than St. Pete. I don't even think it was close. And then you look at kind of some of the rest of the road courses throughout the season, last season and the season before that, pre and post hybrid. I mean, how many really classic road races has IndyCar put on the last few years? And I wouldn't go as far as to say this race was a classic, but I would say it was above average, and the average, of course, is what we've kind of come to know with the Aeroscreen IndyCar. And so from that perspective, I mean, I thought it was it's above the water, and I don't know where it probably ranks. I'd have to go into my memory banks and go, okay, well, were there any really memorable IndyCar road races recently? I don't know, but I thought this one was pretty memorable for what it was. So I kind of agree with Alex there. To Dan West Radio, Thermal is quickly becoming the IndyCar equivalent of NASCAR Cup at Kentucky, where the race is going to be dismissed as bad by fans the moment tires hit the track, regardless of what actually happens. And that goes back to the first 2 points. Whether or not the race was good, a lot of fans are always going to write off Thermal right off the bat because the messaging has been a little bit off. And, that's unfortunate. And I don't know how you fix that because Lord knows, I know this, you cannot change people's minds. You can come with all the facts and the logic and good deals and good intentions, and no matter what you say, some people are always going to feel a certain way. So you're never going to totally overcome that. Unfortunately, the first impression has already been made. So you almost have to always fight the losing battle now of winning folks back on the second, third, fourth, fifth impression. And I don't have the solution. And maybe I'll really go into a deep dive. Maybe we'll throw the Professor Know-It-All costume on and really get into it and what I would do to fix Thermal. I know one of the things that Thermal has talked about is that they're going to reconfigure their racetrack for IndyCar, which is like, what? That's kind of amazing commitment from the Thermal Club to be willing to do that. And again, it almost makes me go, I almost want to give them another chance just because of that willingness to invest. But yeah, it's tough. And for sure, I think a lot of people just are going to immediately write off anything at Thermal, regardless of what it is. Tyler says, I don't think Thermal is the best track for IndyCar, but I'll take it over no race at all, which unfortunately is a low standard, but that's where we are with IndyCar right now. To go back to the schedule point, I could list. So if I don't take emotions out of it, right? If I always think about the IndyCar schedule that I want, I'm going back to a point I made about the IndyCar chassis, right? We always envision the IndyCar that we want, and IndyCar almost never gives us the IndyCar that we want because we all have a different vision of what IndyCar that we want. And the IndyCar that I want, when I put my emotions into it, probably does not include the Thermal Club. We're going elsewhere. We're going to so many different tracks before we go to the Thermal Club. But when I plug the logical part of my brain in, when I take the emotions out of it, yes, objectively, one race is better than no races. And I guess at this point, I was skeptical about a full-length race, and my skepticism was proven wrong. I think the full-length race was much better than the $1 Million Challenge from an entertainment perspective, from a legitimacy standpoint. They made some improvements. So, I guess Thermal is better than no race at all. But that's a very low standard. And that's, again, from a messaging standpoint, that's a tough sell. John the Falcon says, Thermal deserves a third try if they're going to continue to pay that $2 million sanctioning fee for IndyCar to race there. And, at the end of the day, IndyCar doesn't print money anymore. The sponsorships are long gone. The manufacturer support dwindling. They're in a tough spot. And so if you have somewhere, anywhere that's willing to pay you $2 million once a year to race there, you have to at least take it under consideration. So again, kind of our feelings don't really matter all that much at the end of the day. They matter in May because that's when the fans pay the bills. But the rest of the season, it's about who's willing to pay for it. Secret Squirrel says, the track might be fine, but no atmosphere with next to no fans present. It's a bunch of rich people living on a race course that don't want to travel to Long Beach to see a race in person. NASCAR, F1, or Old Kart would have never raced there except for maybe testing. So there's a lot to break down here that the Squirrel has brought up. Yes, I would agree with the point that, well, I wouldn't say there's no atmosphere. I think there is some atmosphere with the folks on the balconies and the pools, and um, there's definitely some atmosphere there. It's maybe not the atmosphere that translates very well on television. I suppose we could talk about that. And yes, the lack of fans at Thermal definitely gives it some 2020 vibes, which I don't think anyone wants to replicate anytime soon. I don't know if it's fair to say that Thermal's just a bunch of rich people that don't want to travel to Long Beach. I would imagine a lot of the members make a trip to Long Beach. But to your point about NASCAR, F1, or kart, not would have never raced there for sure. And that is a difficulty, again, from the messaging standpoint of Thermal. It is a club track. It is an exclusive club track. There's no doubt about it. It's got some glamour to it. There's no doubt there. But yes. And when you think about that, you go NASCAR, F1, and kart. Okay, these were upper echelon series and still are in some cases, except for kart, right? These were upper echelon series. They were bringing in massive amounts of money, massive amounts of sponsorship, interest, fans. A place like NASCAR or Formula One does not need to race at a Thermal Club. They just don't. And I get maybe Formula One does it a little bit when they go to the Middle East or China, or a place where, the fan support isn't nearly as high as it would be a place like in the United States or Europe, or South America. I understand for sure. But by the same token, Formula One's getting paid a lot more than $2 million to put on those races. So, and you think about kart, yes, kart did begin to go down the road of taking the biggest check that they could. They kind of ill-advisedly, ill-advised. They made the ill-advised move to try to expand to Europe, which, was probably the wrong move at the time. But on the whole, kart, which of course is a similar series to IndyCar in many, many ways. In many ways, it was IndyCar racing for a long time. They were able to race at grassroots, or at least places that had grassroots support, whether they raced in California or whether they raced in Michigan or whether they raced in Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas. There were fans that were willing to come out and see them. And I guess that's a big point with Thermal Club is, okay, if IndyCar raced somewhere else in California that wasn't Long Beach or Laguna Seca, would the fans come out to support? Or if you're going to race behind closed doors anyway, maybe you should get, essentially closed doors, or perhaps I should say in empty grandstands. Should you get a paycheck for doing that instead? That's where we're in a real tough spot. And finally, from Philip, empathetic yes on the race being good. The race was decided on track. There were opportunities to pass, and the most interesting strategy of any road course race in recent memory. Sorry, not sorry. I think it was a great race. And I don't know about great, because a great race I think is great from start to finish. Hey, Texas 2023 would be a race that I would say was a great race. Milwaukee, both of them, start to finish, great races. Long Beach last year it wasn't super duper competitive from a passing standpoint, but I thought it was a compelling race from a strategy standpoint. So Thermal, I thought, was an above average race, and it had some very, very high points. It had some very, very low points too, but not as low as we've seen in the past. Yes, the broadcast was probably the lowest point with the circuit breaker going out. And so that's kind of where I stand right now, and where I'm kind of having trouble, and hopefully you can kind of help me with the comments section, is, does Thermal paying for the privilege plus being willing to make improvements year over year, and the racetrack putting on a fairly decent race, does that qualify it to continue? Now, am I like over the moon, jumping up and down, gung-ho, like I was about, Milwaukee or Nashville or Texas right before it got kicked off the schedule? No. I'm not like, oh my God, I got to get to Thermal next year. I'm not feeling that way, but I'm also not feeling the way many other people are feeling, which is that it needs to be kicked off of the schedule. Because I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if you're going to have the Arlington Grand Prix next year and then the next week you end up in Thermal, that helps you fill out the front half of the season. It cuts down some of those enormous gaps in the schedule that we all complain about. Yeah, we're in a weird spot right now. There's no doubt about it. Unverified tomorrow, 8 p.m. DL 500 Club, 8 p.m. on Wednesday. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. Hope the discussions have been good, and I hope you enjoyed the shade I threw at the Ferrari haters. God, it's almost like Ferrari double DQ'd or something. How could you hate them? I don't know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.